Hey, what's up, Zach here, and today I've got the all-new Anta Shockwave 6 Pro, and thanks to Kickzone for sending me a pair of these to check out. If you want to check out a pair for yourself, I'll leave a link in the description below. So, getting started in the uppers, one of the biggest changes, at least in this colorway, from the Shockwave 6, the regular edition, just is how beefy the uppers are without kind of sacrificing some of the things I thought we were going to sacrifice. Now, starting off in the lace line, these are just traditional integrated lace eyelets. They are reinforced to the hilt. I mean, there is a ton of reinforcement on them versus in the Shockwave 6, which they are, more of an interior cuff lace system. Honestly, really no heel slippage if you use the runner's knot, which they still have that really wide runner's knot, which I absolutely love. But using it or not using it, I had zero heel slippage in these. So honestly, to me, I didn't need it, but it is nice to have for people with a little more flat feet, want to fit an orthotic in there, lock that down. Now, these do have a double padded heel counter and ankle collar. As you can see, this really big, thick piece of padding here going around both sides of your Achilles tendon, kind of ending up underneath both of your ankle bones, your malleoli. The rest of it, like I said, is padded decently. Then going into the tongue, you do get a decent amount of padding. In the most proximal portion of the tongue, you do get a really dense, almost neoprene feeling padding, and then going into the forefoot, that is broken up kind of into some macro breathing channels. Then going into the forefoot, that is just netting. It's a thicker netting and more padding on that, but the gusset kind of swoops low, and then all of that kind of padding and open pores swoop up into the toe box. Now, that does do a lot for their breathability, these things. They only heated up 105.4 degrees on the breathability test. I thought these were going to trap heat like crazy, but look at the breathability mapping of them, you kind of see why. Number one, like I said, there is a lot of opportunity for breathing in these, right? There's a lot of strategic channels for breathing. And on that breathability test, you can see fog is getting out of the forefoot. It takes a minute, but it is finding its way out of there. So the materials, number one, can handle heat well. And number two, like I said, there are enough channels for heat to get out. And the upper durability test, 10 seconds highest grit sandpaper. Yeah, the burr does not even make it through the outer layer of this, really chunky textile knit upper. As you can see, there is just so many different patterns on these, and it is so chunky that the textile weaving in here is just so chunky that it is pretty hard to get through it. Now, like the Shockwave 6, you do have that external heel counter complementing an internal heel counter that goes all the way from the medial heel up around and then to the lateral foot. The one thing, though, is versus on the Shockwave 6, you do get this, lateral TPU stabilizer that feels a little more rubbery, and it actually juts out from the shoe versus on the Shockwave 6, where it's just kind of flush with the shoe. It actually kind of comes out of this little foam casing. We'll talk about those implications for fit, which really interesting, but a lot of the same trappings of the Shockwave 6 that make them so good for containment, but on these ones, maybe just a little bit more rugged, a little bit more solid. But getting into midsole teardown, this was absolutely nuts. This is another full bed of Anta's nitrogen-infused foam. This is, from what I'm seeing on here, the quote-unquote pro version of that foam. There is still a carrier foam that goes around into standard carrier foam, and then a top-loaded carbon fiber shank. So you're getting a little bit of weight reduction with the carbon fiber shank. It doesn't cross a zone, so there's not a huge performance benefit. The carbon fiber versus the plastic, like I said, it is going to be a little bit more lower profile, maybe a little bit less weight, but really the proof is in the pudding with the foam. You look at this thing on the bounce height test, got 45 centimeters in the rear foot, 51 in the forefoot, and that is cooking. That is one of the highest we've seen. You do feel that on foot. It does feel very bouncy and very lively while also feeling pretty flat to the ground. We'll talk about that in the fit section, but suffice to say, these shoes definitely have some hop for their profile. Getting into the outsole tread, another really huge dividing line between the Shockwave 6 and the Pros. This is more of a flat punched in tread, right? It doesn't jut out. The tread punches in. It's kind of inlaid on the tread. It's more just like this flame pattern going through there. It does have micro gridding on there, which means each line of tread also is stamped individually with a little bit of a micro grid there to give you more traction. Now, these things did slip at 39 degrees on the grip test ramp, which is, higher end of normal. And obviously on the viewing box, you're not going to see a ton of rubber movement out of a stamped in tread pattern. But I will say on court, these things really have some confident, sure-footed grip. Now, part of that is because they put you so foot flat to the ground, and it's a continuous tread pattern, so you're just getting a ton of tread on the ground to grip. There's a lot of opportunities there for grip. Well, what I noticed is, now number one, the durometer on these comes in at 18. So these are fine for outdoor court, especially because they're such a flat, chunky, punched in tread pattern. These don't wear down as much as ones that are, jut out, kind of like the Shockwave 6. So if you're looking for an outdoor shoe, the Shockwave 6 Pro, to me, that is definitely the way to go. And just like I said, the way the rubber kind of moves on indoor and outdoor courts, it's pretty smooth and actually pretty consistent on both courts. And also just looking at the Outsole durability test on these 10-second Tyus grit sandpaper, I mean, really not even a millimeter of damage on this, basically just wipes off the micro gritting. So, as long as you're not a crazy dragger, slider, produce a ton of friction, honestly, these should do pretty darn well for you on outdoor courts. Look at these things on the speed ratio. They come in at a 3.19, shank score of 0.2 brings it up to a 3.39. Yeah, I mean, I think that's where they belong. Like I said, they do put you foot flat, so you're not as efficient in them, right? You're more flat to the ground, which also gives you a ton of stability. But the shoe with how much pop and bounce, that's where you get a lot of the speed from these. So yeah, I think they're every bit that quick off the ground. Like I said, especially on outdoor courts, I feel like this tread just does maybe a little bit better on those outdoor courts in terms of get up and go. But on indoors, hardwood, vinyl, rubberized, obviously they're fantastic as well. But getting into the fit of the Shockwave 6 Pro, another, significant difference from the Shockwave 6s, even though all the stats are pretty much the same. They come in at a 14-degree inflare and a 28.7 centimeter length, 9.1 centimeter metatarsal width, 9.5 centimeter toe box width, and a 26-degree toe box taper. So yeah, I mean, it's the same overall shape as the Shockwave 6. It's just that because this little piece here, right, this little lateral stabilizer here on the outside of the uppers juts out of the shoe and kind of maybe just has a little bit more flexibility to it, I did not get nearly the cramping in the 6 Pros as I did in the Shockwaves. And honestly, these feel like a more substantial shoe. Now, I still think it's the same fit profile of the Shockwave 6s, so I'd probably just, it's the same fit. It's just, it's going to be easier to break in for the wider feet. In terms of the snake bitten foot, kind of same rules apply. These are pretty insulating shoes, and you can lock down an orthotic in these. Obviously, a lower profile orthotic is going to be a little bit better just because you can best utilize the double padding in the ankle collar, but they will lock down, really any orthotic, really anything from super low profile, and you could fit in a bulkier custom orthotic into these too, especially for an ankle sprainer, like I said, because they put you foot flat on the ground, right? Just a little bit slight eversion in there. Just by their nature, they kind of keep you a little bit more stable. That's kind of the rub on these. You're feeling the ground a little bit more on the medial side of your foot. You get a little bit more of that sensation on the big toe ball of your foot on the medial side and the big toe joint. So, like I said, if you're somebody with pre-existing kind of hypermobile flat foot, I would just throw an orthotic in these, and they're fine. If you're not somebody with that pre-existing condition, then I think, then they're just fine for pretty much everything else. And getting the performance of the Shockwave 6 Pro, yeah, I mean, I kind of felt pretty similar to the Shockwave 6s. Like I said, though, in terms of outdoor kind of more smooth motion, they really do kind of glide on outdoor asphalt, cement, and concrete very, very well. And that's kind of the rub with a lot of these more chunky stamped in patterns. They do very well as long as the durometer is high enough to kind of resist wear. Like I said, these feel more like the Kai 1. That's kind of their same tread pattern on these. And they're just a little more durable, right, than the Shockwave 6s. Yeah, I mean, they definitely feel like they've got a ton of pop, but the Shockwave 6s feel like they had a ton of pop too. So to me, in terms of performance-wise, are you going to notice a huge difference versus like that 43 centimeter average bounce height on the Shockwave 6 versus the 48 on the Shockwave 6 Pro? I didn't notice a ton of difference. These felt maybe just a little bit more lively underfoot. And, I play in these before I do the bounce height test, so that's not really, I don't have that rattling around in my head, that number. And yes, they felt a little bit more, snappy and bouncy. Some of that could have been the tread too. Just easier to kind of roll from step to step. They're just different, shoes. Like I said, if you like the grip of that kind of, radial herringbone, right, that 45-degree herringbone, that razor pattern, that's great. If you like more of the flat punched-in tread profile of the Kai 1, you're going to like these. They're both very quick in a contained area, and surprisingly for a shoe that allows this much kind of foot flat feeling, they do get up and down the court very easily. So once again, all in all, a really solid shoe. And like like a lot of the Shockwave line, the 5s were fantastic, and like I said, with the 6s, it's a good line of shoes and it's just well made. So love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below, especially which one are you going for, the Shockwave 6 or the 6 Pro? And speaking of the 6, if you do want to see that shoe go under the knife and kind of see all the big differences between them in the uppers, midsole, outsole, and fit, make sure you click into this video up above and subscribe down below. Respect your rubber and foam. I'll see you somewhere in the sneakerverse.